Westside. Thank you for being here. It means a great deal to me when you were able to show up on Sundays. Thank you very much for making Westside a big part of your lives and loves. In a way, we live our lives within this space, and we also live our loves. Love is the doctrine of this church. We love one another, not necessarily in a romantic way, although that is entirely possible. I've been privileged to officiate a wedding or two for Westsiders who've fallen in love. But we mostly love one another in a familial way. With the size of our congregation today, we can love one another like families do. We're in a strange spot because the familial stage of congregational life and growth feels good, but it is not always very sustainable. In order for Westside to sustain herself better, it is probably going to be necessary to move beyond the size, which revolves around one person, namely the minister, to a place that revolves around the congregation itself and for programs. It sometimes takes a couple of attempts to make a move to that size, that program size church. But I believe Westside will. This place is in good shape to get there, I think. Now, last week, as most of you know, I announced to the congregation that I will be leaving Westside soon. That I'll be following my spouse, Gail, as she takes on new opportunities and challenges in the Chicago area. We are excited and sad all at the same time. But the reaction of this congregation has been overwhelmingly positive. Both Gail and I have received emails and phone calls and cards through the postal mail expressing sadness with our leaving, and yet at the same time, appreciation for the time we have been here, and for the excitement, the challenges that might be ahead of us. Only a couple of responses have been less than positive with the announcement of our departure. And while that is unfortunate, it is not unexpected. As I said last Sunday, there will be a wide array of emotions associated with my departure. There will be a wide variety of reactions, some healthy, some not so much. I hope in due time, forgiveness will be in order. The thing about families, about ministers, and about religious communities is that we have the opportunity to frequently practice forgiveness. Any place where we do not expect perfection, and that, I believe, is every place, we can expect to have plenty of opportunities to forgive. The ability to forgive is an excellent trait. The religions with which I'm most familiar all have the place within them which encourages the extension of forgiveness to others. Individuals who have wronged another individual, and those who have wronged the wider community. There are some who today believe our ability to forgive is not only good for the person we forgive, it is not only good for the person who does the forgiving, but it is good for society as a whole. It could be very well that those societies which have developed their forgiveness muscles more fully have had a unique and very tangible edge in the evolutionary process. I'll speak more about that a little later, but there is little doubt that forgiveness is a very good attribute which communities can actively encourage. Now, you may remember a few weeks back in May of this year when our own Dr. Don Jackson spoke of forgiveness. It was a wonderful and personal reflection that spoke to my heart. Don did a fine job in his reflection. And he told us about the work of Professor Robert Enright of the University of Wisconsin and how Enright has studied the benefits of forgiveness and developed a process which, when followed, makes forgiving easier. And it reminded me of the very first year I was minister at Westside in 2005. I also used Enright as a source for talking about forgiveness. It was a difficult time for the congregation. Our our facility on McCart Street had burned down in March of that year. And the minister of the church had resigned in June of the previous year. The congregation, I think, was raw with emotion at the time. And there I stood, the one-quarter-time minister of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, then being housed in a wonderful Jewish synagogue. I can remember that I talked about how we all just do the best we can. The minister who had preceded me did the best she could. The congregation, which had only existed for about 10 years at the time, was doing the best it could. And how I could only do the best I could. And that we as a congregation would very likely have plenty of opportunities to forgive in our future. For those who were here back then, I think you might remember that we did have the opportunity to forgive a great deal. Congregational meetings these days are a cakewalk compared to those we had back then, aren't they? It seems so far away today. It seems like so much has changed. And much has changed. And at the same time, things are so familiar. As a minister who is now in the process of departing from Westside, I am confident I will have done the very best I could, despite not being perfect. The congregation, despite not being perfect, will continue to do the best that she can. And the next person or persons called to fill this pulpit will do the very best she or he can, and yet will not be perfect. And so, yes, there will continue to be plenty of opportunities to forgive at Westside. But forgiveness can be tricky. I have heard of a minister's Sunday sermon that was titled, "Forgive Your Enemies." Toward the end of the service, he asked his congregation, "How many of you have forgiven your enemies?" About half of the congregation held up their hands. The minister then repeated his question, "How many of you have forgiven your enemies?" And since it was now well past lunchtime and people were ready to go, this time about 80% held up their hands. And then he repeated his question again, "How many of you have forgiven your enemies?" Now tired of this repeated questioning, all responded that they had indeed forgiven their enemies. All that is, except one small elderly woman. "Mrs. Jones," inquired the minister, "are you not willing to forgive your enemies?" "I don't have any enemies," she replied, smiling. "Mrs. Jones, that is very unusual. How old are you?" 93, she replied. "Oh, Mrs. Jones, what a blessing and a lesson you are to all of us. Would you please come up to the front of this congregation and tell us how a person can live 93 years and not have an enemy in the world?" Yeah. Some of you already got that. The little sweetheart of a woman tottered up the aisle, turned to face the congregation, and said, "I've outlived all the SOBs." Did you see it coming?
Just a little bit.
You've heard it said before, but forgiveness really does more good for the person who forgives than for the one being forgiven. To carry around the resentment and what some might call the hardness of heart can take a toll on us, both mentally and physically. There are very real physical maladies which befall those who forgive less often. And there is a real toll on the spirit of a person who chooses to continue carrying around a grudge. Now, I've thought about this before in a very simple way, how good, how maybe even transformational forgiveness can be of the forgiver. And if you think about it, I believe this example makes sense. So I like to use the illustration of my well-known ability to drive a car almost perfectly. I know you know how good of a driver I am because I have told you before. In fact, I am the best darn driver I know. And with my consummate skill and obvious hand-eye coordination, I very rarely make a mistake when driving my little Prius around town. Because I'm so good, I find it difficult to tolerate those with lesser skill. So when I find those lesser drivers around me, as I do most days in most situations, I'm flabbergasted when another driver cuts me off, for instance, or doesn't properly signal his lane-changing intentions, or a whole host of other offenses. But enraged at the inconsiderateness of another driver, I might stoop in my driver's seat. In my younger days, I might even offer a hand gesture intended to let the other driver see and let them know how offended I am at their inadequate driving skills. Skills that without a doubt are unable to match my own. But this other driver doesn't even see me, nor does the driver see my gesture of frustration. Nor does the driver understand my rage. Pulling up beside that car, my glare of disapproval goes unnoticed. Doesn't register with the other driver, and I am left to stew in my own soup of irascibility. The other driver doesn't even know I'm angry. So as I stew, I am not hurting my transgressor in any way whatsoever. The only person who is hurting is me. And that is often how forgiveness is too. We hurt ourselves a great deal more by not being the kind of person we can be, probably the kind of person that we want to be, when we do not allow ourselves to be kind and forgive those who trespass against us. Not all of our situations are as cut and dry as the driver scenario, and yet most, the vast majority of them are. We have choices all along the way. Are we going to hold on to something that may feel good initially but has little benefit, or are we going to forgive? Are we going to let go of the hostility within us, or will we hold on to the emotion that does more damage to us than to its intended target? It is, I believe, a choice. And there are stories of forgiveness that may initially seem unimaginable. There are communities where forgiveness is an expected way of life. You probably all remember the incident in 2006 where a gunman entered a one-room schoolhouse in Pennsylvania. The gunman took 10 schoolgirls hostage. He would kill 5 of them and wound the others before killing himself. Words of forgiveness were sent to the family of the killer before the blood on the schoolhouse floor had been cleaned up. Because this was an Amish community where they knew the gunman, they knew his family, and they knew they were hurting too. They take seriously Jesus' command to forgive, and their communities are tightly knit. Few choose to leave that religious and social home. Now, like any other community, the Amish are not perfect. There are bad actors within every community, and the Amish will, on very rare occasions, ostracize a member of the community. But for the most part, most people could learn a thing or two about forgiveness from these gentle people. How forgiveness is serious business, and how offering it consistently is good for the soul, good for the spirit. It is good for the sight. I have been reading that the most successful early cultures were likely those who offered forgiveness freely. Evidently, even monkeys practice forgiveness often. So from colonies of monkeys to early human societies, Those who made the choice to forgive more often survived in ways that were beyond what might be otherwise offered as an answer to their success. This isn't give-free license for community members to act in any way they want. There seems to always have been society members who do not pull their weight, who do not actively contribute to the betterment of the group they belong to, or who too often commit deeds the group deems to be punishable. Early societies evidently had a detailed yet mostly unspoken way of dealing with troublemakers. Even monkeys will eventually forcibly remove those who continue to do what is not in the best interest of the group. So if one were to take advantage of what some have called the forgiveness factor of a group too often, there are very real consequences to that. Now, I cannot claim to know a great deal about game theory, but I do know it is the study of strategic decision-making. Roger Myerson, an economist and Nobel laureate at the University of Chicago, says game theory is the study of mathematical models of conflict and cooperation between intelligent, rational decision-makers. And in a book I've been reading recently titled Beyond Revenge, The Evolution of the Forgiveness Instinct, I learned how a game theory model was set up, and what the model suggested was that over the time of human existence, societies which have had within them an instinct of forgiveness were better able to survive. Their groups were more often stronger than others because their emotional bond was higher. And they procreated at a faster rate than others because their emotional bond was higher. They were simply more evolutionarily successful. The model suggests that it is in our best interest to forgive. It is in our best interest as individuals, it is in the best interest of the community, and it is in the best interest of the species to forgive. So here we are again. Much like we were in 2005 when I spoke of forgiveness for the first time at Westside. Many things have changed, and yet many things are quite similar. One minister is leaving, and somewhere out there, another minister who doesn't even know it today is headed toward your pulpit. In the time in between, and of course, ever thereafter, there will be occasions for forgiveness. Martin Luther King said, "He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love." And this church is not lacking love. And while forgiveness is not always easy, it is almost always worth it. The choice, however, is yours. I hope you practice forgiveness extensively, that you offer forgiveness often, and that to forgive those who do not take advantage of your generosity is the default response. Even though all will be well, there will be many opportunities to practice your skills of forgiveness. But I have faith that if monkeys can do it, even we Unitarians can probably do it. As we rise together in your spirit and join in singing our closing hymn number 298, Wake Down My Senses.